This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Orange Land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. One of the stars of the Australian newspaper's 2024 Green List of 100 climate and energy influencers, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie, and congrats on the fabulous photo spread.
Thanks for embarrassing me with no notice, Luke. Love you for that. Thank you. That's a pretty cool thing for me, I'm not going to lie. So, yeah, it was nice to be acknowledged in that way. And if there was any danger of my ego getting away from me, I have two small humans keeping me in check and busily cleaning up after them. And have zero respect for whatever I do when I'm not giving them things to eat or things to play with.
Don't you just have the magazine nearby that you can actually... Do you ever say, look, kids, do you know who I am? And show them the photo spread.
Very nearly got shredded in a tantrum the other day anyway. So it's now sitting on top of the fridge, you know, pride of position.
Well, Frankie, you can look forward to that lack of respect plumbing new dimensions every year from now on.
Can't wait.
But, of course, there was one other co-host of the Let Me Sum Up podcast listed on the 2024 Green List, a man who, according to his write-up in The Australian, knows that the average Aussie doesn't want to think about energy, which is why he has joined the small band of heroic energy nerds that sweat the small stuff so that the rest of us can sleep a little easier at night. That man, perched atop a skyscraper and brooding over a spreadsheet, is Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
Well, look, if I was to be perched atop a skyscraper, I would like to be fighting off biplanes with my enormous giant ape hands. But that fate has been denied to me by a mocking karma.
All right. Well, on this week's show, we string up the recycled tinsel for Climate Christmas and crack open the Climate Change Authority's 2024 progress report. But first, as Bullwinkle J. Moose used to say, this time for sure, it is time for another review of the national electricity market, and specifically how the wholesale market can be reformed to ensure we get investment in the renewables and storage we need. Conducted by a panel of experts and led by energy sector luminary Associate Professor Tim Nelson, the review's terms of reference are pretty interesting for the things they rule in, the things they rule out, and the things they forget to mention at all. Tennant, what did you make of this announcement?
So, it was a long time coming. We'd all been expecting some form of review of the national electricity market to be announced for a good long while. For a time, it seemed that it was going to be done by the Productivity Commission, which would be a new window on this stuff. And in the end, it is the model of a review supported by a secretariat from the federal government and secondees from all over the place, but with an independent panel of experts, as you said, Tim Nelson, but also Paula Conboy, ex-chair of the Australian Energy Regulator, Ava Hancock, ex-Deputy Chief of Staff to Matt Keane when he was Treasurer of New South Wales, and Phil Hirschhorn, a consultant at BCG. So we've got two economists, a lawyer and an engineer. They're all good eggs, but they're confronting a challenge that has shattered a previous group of people who tried to make something happen, because it's hard to get agreement on the future of the market design of the national electricity market. We had the post-2025 NEM review, of which, of whose recommendations, a few things have happened, but the highest profile things all got killed. One of those things was the idea of locational marginal pricing in the wholesale market. That has died what appears to be its final death in the recent meeting of the ECMC, where the people who loved that idea the most at the Australian Energy Market Commission recommended, presumably through gritted teeth, that the latest version of that idea not be adopted. And the other big casualty was the idea of a capacity market, not the Government Contracting Investment Scheme, the CIS, that we have been busily implementing for the last little while, but a market design where electricity users would be charged for the capacity that was determined by AEMO or a market process to be needed. And we got no agreement on not just on those things, but really on the whole direction of change to the market. We couldn't even get agreement on whether fundamental change was needed. And that's a challenge because it's really arguable whether there is any basis for investment in electricity assets beyond the strict availability of contracts from different levels of government for a limited time and capacity of projects only. The wholesale electricity market, in theory, is powered by the energy-only market that not only defines what gets dispatched when, that very immediate mechanical influence, but is meant to influence or really determine investment decisions for the longer term. And it's not really doing that because, one, maybe it never would have done that. It was introduced at a time of great overcapacity, and it, as we've discussed previously, squeezed efficiencies out, but didn't generate a lot of investment, although not a lot of investment was needed for a while. But it might not work when most of the capacity in it has got a zero short-run marginal cost, and 3, there's all manner of policy interventions motivated by governments not believing that the mechanism would work, that themselves, if there was any incentive for investment provided by the market, tend to strangle that. So for now, we've got the Capacity Investment Scheme, we've got the New South Wales Roadmap, we've got whatever remains of the New South Wales, of the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan post-change of government. We've got some things in Victoria. All of that is quantity limited or time limited. What comes next? This review is meant to answer that. And whatever it is, we just have to bloody agree on something, cohere around, even if it's making the energy-only market work, which some people believe still that it would if it was just allowed to. But whatever it is, we've got to agree it and then get on with it rather than having another process when nobody coheres around anything.
I guess I understand all of that. The thing that just was a little weird to me was just how narrow the scope of the inquiry is around that specific question. Like, really, this review's been put together to look at those market settings to promote investment in firmed renewable generation and storage. And it's pretty narrowly scoped around basically just that.
Well, it's literally called Review of Market Settings in the National Electricity Market to Follow the Capacity Investment Scheme.
Yeah.
So it's like Capacity Investment Scheme is the Band-Aid. They're like, what is the long-term structural solution to do this same job? The question I have is, how is it possible to answer that question without dealing with a whole bunch of other questions around how the market functions?
So presumably because we're all just, sitting over here with review fatigue of everything.
And review PTSD.
Yeah, it's kind of like this can't solve, for all those other questions because, so much is sort of ruled out of scope. But then weirdly, the terms of reference talk about the fact the panel will not consider options that involve implementing carbon trading schemes, carbon markets, or government support for new fossil fuel generation. Just had to get that one in there.
I don't think that's weird at all. I think that the things that the right will attack us on, we're not going to look at, and things that the left will attack us on, we're not going to look at that either. Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for all the conversation out there from so many stakeholder groups around broader considerations around governance, pricing, all of that, those things do need to be dealt with. So I understand why they've been tasked to look at this, but, then when can we expect, another process to deal with all of those other things? Because that's that would interact with whatever decisions are made in and around this as well. That bit of it's a bit of a head scratcher to me.
I do want to weigh in on this paragraph 12, that the one that rules out consideration of carbon trading schemes, carbon markets, or government support for new fossil fuel generation. These things are not just linked by the fact that they're political hot button issues that would get the government attacked and muddy the waters if they were on the table. They are the things. They are closely related to the reasons for which the last review fell over in this respect, which is that we have a bunch of reason to think that we need a significant capacity of really, really lightly utilised gas peakers operating as backup. And we've got some period where there's closures going on of coal-fired generators, and you very much want to be confident that you're managing the availability of dispatchable capacity properly through that period. And so the idea of a capacity market that was being pushed last time as a solution to this was, well, that's a mechanism that's been used in various forms in various places to get that confidence and a business model for assets that might not be used that much, but you want to know that they're there. The thing that was going on, though, was a lot of people were really worried that mechanism would support high emissions assets to operate when they shouldn't. Whether they were existing coal-fired power stations that would last longer than they should or dispatch more than they should, or gas-fired power stations that would be kind of called back up but actually operate much more frequently, and emissions overall would be higher than they should be. And that led to a lot of resistance to the capacity mechanism. And there wasn't a very convincing answer that was able to be given to why those fears wouldn't come true, except by things like Victoria demanding that any fossil assets be ruled out of the capacity mechanism, which would be very hard to reconcile with the role of gas backup in it. So all of which is to say, we do need to solve both of those issues. What's the thing that provides the business model for some high emissions intensity but low utilisation assets that we strongly think we need some of, and what is it that's going to give us confidence that emissions are not going to be higher than they should be in the electricity system. And these words in paragraph 12 provides some wiggle room if you read them with a generous eye to plenty of other solutions still being available to both the emissions part and the how do you make new gas peakers that don't currently have a business model happen. But we're really going to have to see. The dynamic under the previous federal government was that clever ideas in this regard would get noticed and reported and alarm the backbench and be ruled out that afternoon by the minister. who would have been hoping to actually implement those ideas. What's the dynamic in this political environment? Hopefully a bit more cautious about a rush to judgment. But we one way or another, we're going to have to solve the emissions piece and the peaker piece. And they're joined at the hip.
Yeah. So we've sort of covered what's ruled in, which is kind of like child of CIS, and what's ruled out is some of these specific policy mechanisms, although, as you say, Tennant, there's a little bit of wriggle room in there. Not in there at all was any recognition for the role of the demand side in solving some of these issues, which is super relevant to the wholesale market. You've got references to consumer energy resources in there, but no recognition of the material impact that properly activating the demand side, whether you're talking about demand response or consultation of energy use with the availability of renewable energy resources. I can do the Stations of the Cross if you like, but you've heard me say this before.
The full passion play, please.
It's kind of really frustrating to see this same kind of split brain syndrome played out in this space. It's 2024, guys. We should be able to have a conversation that encompasses both supply and demand and how those two things fit together, particularly given the regular references to the ISP in these terms of reference. And anyone that is a student of the ISP would be very aware of how important the demand side is to us getting through these issues, even if we have critiques about how fulsomely the ISP characterises the pathway forward to activate those demand side resources. Now, it's not ruled out, and there are some pretty sharp minds on this panel. So led by Tim Nelson, he knows this stuff, and so there's the opportunity for them to dig into that should they have the time and inclination. But we'll need to rely on them and also us and other stakeholders engaging with the review to ensure the demand side is firmly on the agenda.
Yeah, look, it's frustrating because it's going to have to rely on stakeholders to arc up and say, well, what about all, these things you forgot to mention in your terms of reference? But as you say, Luke, it's not ruled out. And I think if you were taking a generous read of the second half of paragraph 10 in this scope of inquiry, they're asked to make actionable recommendations to support the development, stage implementation of reforms to the NEM wholesale market, support the achievement of the NEO, including affordability, reliability and emissions reduction in the long-term interests of consumers and prosperity of Australia's economy. Like, if it wasn't just tacked on the end of another sentence that was talking about the CIS, like actually there's scope for them to recommend a whole bunch of stuff that would, that would address those needs. So I think you're right. Let's hope they're going to go into this process with open ears.
And if only there was a group of stakeholders that had prepared a fulsome agenda for demand-side governance reform, then released it quite recently, right, guys? Right?
But that would never happen. Oh, wait.
Oh, wait.
Check the show notes, dear listener, and you will find just such a thing with a ribbon wrapped around it.
Maybe we stop at the self-dealing threshold just, with our tippy toes on the line. Suffice to say that our organisations that we work for in our day job, plus ACOS, put out a paper called Demanding Better, which is doing what it says on the tin and making the case for reforms to our energy systems to support better integration of demand-side considerations. Lots of good recommendations in there, guys. Maybe we'll leave it there.
Fancy footwork, Switch. I like it. Shall we chat about a report?
Yes, we shall.
In late November, Australia's Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, tabled a number of documents in Parliament, including Australia's latest emissions projections, the government's annual climate change statement, and the Climate Change Authority's 2024 annual progress report. The CCA's progress report is both a status check on Australia's progress towards its emissions reduction targets and an opportunity for the independent authority to provide advice to the government on what it can do to increase the likelihood of those targets being met. This year's progress report has 3 main sections. Part 1 provides an overview of progress on emissions reduction efforts across the entire economy. Part 2 largely focuses on how to accelerate the rollout of renewable energy infrastructure. And Part 3 weighs in on the early performance of the revamped safeguard mechanism. So, Frankie, what do you reckon? According to the CCA, should Australia be on the naughty list or the nice list?
Well, if I had to make a verdict on climate Christmas at this early stage of our chat, I'd say we're sort of, transitioning from the back of the bus, naughty children sort of sitting somewhere towards the back of the front half of the bus, creeping into nice territory, but, still with...
You've taken my neat binary and replaced it with a very complex metaphor.
That's just the magic that I bring to this little trio conversation. So
there's no room for simple binaries in the pages of The Australian, Luke. You should know that.
That's right.
Okay, so we're halfway up the bus. That's what you're saying.
Where was I going with that horribly complex metaphor? No,
I'm not sure.
I think I was straying into nice territory, but we're not at the top of Sanders, nice list where you're going to get everything, that you want for Christmas. So, what I did? Because the structure of this document is kind of striking in the 3 chunks that it's broken up into, with 2 deep dives on, kind of like specific areas of policy. I thought that feels different than last year's document. I went back and had a look at the 2023 progress report, because I think there is an evolution that's gone on here in the documents. Last year's progress report had, a lot more time kind of in the early chapters up front, kind of setting out the latest of like the science and kind of what we're experiencing. And there is they do that in this report. It's pretty snappy though, I'd say, and they're largely referring to really good analyses that are done kind of elsewhere by CSIRO and BOM and things like that. So to me, it looks like a bit of an evolution of, I think, the impact that they want this report to have. They clearly want people to walk away with a sense of like, what are the main key takeaway recommendations, that they want policy makers, the government, to pick up and run with. Last year's report had, quite comprehensive 42 odd recommendations. This year we've got a snappy 10. So, I just think it's been structured in a way as to have, I think real impact. Like you want to walk away with the idea that this report focused on 3 key things, that it had 10 main recommendations to make, and that there was this kind of overarching message that in their assessment, we're doing, well in terms of we're within the carbon budget that we've got out to 2030. That is mostly, though, due to sort of undershooting, if you like, where our projected emissions were going to be through the pandemic, because we had, no transport running for a time and things like that. So we're within the carbon budget that we had available to 2030. Not that I think that should be the metric by which we judge our efforts necessarily, but we're doing that, and we are seeing emissions falling overall, although very slightly. So I think this year we sort of just saw a very small overall reduction in emissions, like 1%. And that was a 12 megatons of CO2 equivalent. drop. But the granularity within that, I think, is where it gets interesting. And actually what I thought they did a really good job of in just kind of illuminating and making a point of discussing was that most of the emissions reduction we've really seen across the economy over that 20 odd years since our 2005 baseline has been in the ag and land sector. Most of that abatement has come from that. And then in more recent years, we've seen electricity and energy dropping small incremental amounts year on year. But then the remaining sectors, transport, industry waste, resources, buildings, and other things, they've all kind of increased by about 13, 15% or something over that period of time. And so I think sort of in framing it this way, they're doing a really good thing, which is saying we've made some progress and, they touch on key policy interventions that the government's made in the previous year. So that, one of the focus chapters is on the safeguard mechanism reforms and how they think that's tracking. The other one is around the electricity and energy sectors, decarbonisation. But it's also making the point that actually, if we're going to be sort of sticking to within that budget and making the year-on-year decreases that we need to be, which is in the order of 15 megatons a year, we need to be starting to see action consistently across all those other sectors of the economy. So, for someone who's been complaining about a lot of reports' refusal to focus on other sectors in a meaningful way outside of energy, I thought this was a good signal. But, it doesn't go too deep into some of those sectors either. So I think it kind of, opens a door and things. There are some good recommendations we should talk about and touch through. But I'm also kind of left feeling like I want to see a little bit more substance behind what they had to say on some of the other sectors. That was my snapshot view. I'm keen to hear what you guys made of the recommendations. Maybe we could step through those.
Well, on the naughty or nice thing, of course the Climate Change Authority thinks that Australians are nice. But the question is, can Santa provide what they deserve? And they're noting the toy factories have only just been built, and it's pretty unclear if there's enough elves to staff them and how
supply chain issues, Tennant.
Indeed. So they're saying we've had a flurry of policy that's like very relevant policy. Some of it they recommend strengthening, but the expanded safeguard mechanism, the capacity investment scheme and the new vehicle efficiency standard are the three biggest things that they point to. And, they've all just started and will need to, are intended to crank up. There's some more cranking up that they could do, but it's like, will they deliver? Will all the practical stuff that needs to happen fast enough to produce the outcomes envisaged by those policies? So they do have a bunch of recommendations towards all of this. They have a lot of recommendations on the electricity sector because even though they do have that broader let's look at where things are happening and not happening across the economy focus, they also think that electricity is like a really important enabler for a lot of the abatement that is possible in the rest of the economy. So they have an extra level of thought and detail there. But maybe I'll review the electricity ones and then pass the baton. They think we need a stronger, broader, longer, more supercharged, pumped up capacity investment scheme, or something else that works. They're open to other forms, but legislate it and either extend it past 2030 or do something else good. they want to prioritise projects better, and they want there to be, among other things, an energy transition coordinator, a senior position inside the federal DQ that would do a lot of work that doesn't sound fun at all, with different levels of government and different bits of government trying to unsnarl red tape tangles and get projects that are identified as a priority moving faster. They had a couple of ideas that were potentially quite controversial, but very interesting, including let's get more distributed energy resources going at commercial and industrial sites where there's not all that much rooftop solar and associated storage happening so far versus residential. And so they don't flesh this out, but an idea along these lines was put forward in some detail by Bruce Mountain in the Factories of Power ? Report a few months ago. They also want electricity distributors to be able to install batteries in their networks with or without partnerships with market participants, and recover efficient costs through network charges. So that's really altering the status quo that we currently have with ring fencing and the view that regulated network entities shouldn't be playing in bits of the competitive market. But I think they've got a bit of a Ron Ben David-esque, all that stuff's just not working that well, let's throw some toys around and see what happens view. And they're going to commission more work, or they want to commission more work. Maybe they want to be told, maybe they want to be given some more money to commission more work on those ideas and report on them by April of next year, which would make it relevant input for the NEM wholesale review. Oh, sorry. There's one more controversial idea.
There's a lot.
There is a lot. They want AEMO to assess needs for and then procure combined facilities with synchronous condensers to stabilise the electricity grid, and gas peakers that are also capable of burning hydrogen or other renewable fuels as backup capacity. They want AEMO to procure both of those things, ideally at the same sites, through a competitive process, and then pass the costs on to electricity users. That is an idea that could be debated in the NEM wholesale review. And some people will not like it. From multiple different perspectives, but they are bubbling with ideas over at the CCA.
And it's very striking, as we do the handoff from relying on effectively land sector change to drive emissions reduction to the electricity system to drive emissions reduction. The projection that they reference is that 80% of the emissions reduction that we're expecting between now and 2030 is coming from electricity decarbonisation, which is pretty nuts. For me, that suggests that we're over-indexed on one particular pathway for emissions reduction. Not that any of that is not important, but we need to be doing more in other areas to give us the best possible chance of hitting our targets. And I wonder if the CCA, by focusing on the electricity bit of this and kind of, yes, mentioning other sectors, yes, mentioning other opportunities, but perhaps focusing on the less, is actually falling into the same trap as the government, which is the over-reliance on the rapid renewable rollout to hit our 2030 target. There are governments right around the country that are already throwing a lot of stuff at the wall on renewable rollout. The CCA can say, well, yes, you need to do even more. But another strategy would be, well, keep doing that, but also do these other things that maybe take some of the pressure off that particular pathway. And I'll say the thing, leaning into energy efficiency and demand management and electrification and fuel switching and all the things that you need to do to not just take some of the pressure off for 2030, but you need to do them anyway to get any sort of ambitious 2035 target. And that theme is picked up to a degree in the energy efficiency section, which is really good, but I reckon it could have been even more prominent.
Yeah, I think for the same reason that, that it would have been good to see more on other sectors. Like, I agree with you. I also think they're in a little bit of a catch-22 situation with these reports where, on the one hand, they know that, various other, sort of things are in the works, NEM review, etc. They clearly have some reasonably specific thoughts about what they think needs to happen in the energy sector and want that to be known ahead of all that work happening. But on 2035, it would have been good to see maybe not, sort of song and dance detail about every other sector, but some of the things that I thought they have done a good job at introducing concepts in this report that you could have leaned on then a bit on developing up key recommendations was this idea of having a policy tracker in place where they're, say they've got separate tools that sit off to the side of these reports. There's a policy tracker. They're working on indicators as well, like leading indicators on how we're doing, across different sectors of the economy. I think there could be a nice way of bringing in some of that analysis at a higher level to give you a bit of that dashboard view, because what's not coming through in the report as strongly is yep, we're definitely under resourced and minimally focused in the energy efficiency and building side or whatever it is across the economy. And so they could have then, without I think doing too much extra work, given more emphasis or kind of prominence then to some of the sort of threshold things that need to happen in those other sectors to unlock more abatement, because each one of those other sectors is, as complicated as the energy sector is. We're starting to do them a little disservice over time in not unpacking those as fulsomely, but there would be ways of bringing that in. So, just talking about the other recommendations, because the ones that Tennant spoke about, 7 of the 10 were energy sector focused. Number 8 is all about energy efficiency. It's focused on building energy efficiency. And it has some specific priority actions. The overall thrust is around accelerating building retrofits through improved information standards and further national policy support. Specifically, they want to see expansion of the MEPS standards, so minimum energy performance standards under the GEMS Act. Establishing a national rebate or grant mechanism for building energy efficiency upgrades for low-income earners. I think the proposition is that the HUF, God, I hate that acronym, is largely kind of there to provide low-cost finance to more middle income.
That is the Home Energy Upgrade Fund for those playing around at home and lucky enough not to have the acronym HOOF inflicted on them on the daily.
That's the HOOF of today.
So bad. That should have never made it sort of through the nets on the way in. They talk about the importance of government-owned buildings and making sure that they're aligned with the public service net zero 2030 target. And they reference state and territory governments needing to expand disclosure schemes and mandating public reporting of that. So presumably that's a reference to things like the neighbours scheme in commercial buildings, but also the fledgling work on a home energy rating scheme as well. So, like, nothing to disagree with there. Those are all good things. They're definitely on the shopping list. Did you think it was interesting that they did not recommend an energy efficiency target or something that sort of denotes higher level ambition on the demand side?
They mentioned the idea of targets on the way through. I do think that's interesting. I think that would be incredibly helpful. I think that the CCA tends to think carefully about the role of targets in driving policy, and I would have welcomed them sort of stating a view on that. I think it's interesting that they focus so heavily on buildings. They reference industrial energy efficiency and fuel switching on the way through. But I got the sense, particularly based on the organisations that were referencing, that they had a lot of engagement from built environment stakeholders through the consultation process. Frankie laughing in the background.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Some of them nationally known for their influence in green energy.
That's right. They got a lot of input on that front, and so felt confident making recommendations, and perhaps less input on other economic sectors and the opportunities on the demand side. So I think that if I was to provide one critique, and yes, you could say, well, targets would be helpful to kind of guide ambition and sort of really land the contribution the demand side is having to the overall decarbonisation task. It would also be just the diversity of sectors that are encompassed in that recommendation, because there is a lot to do in other parts of the economy on the energy efficiency front. So yes, but overall, I thought the section was really, really good, and a good base to build on for next year.
Well, I was going to mention something that didn't make it into their recommendations, actually, to the point about life beyond the electricity sector. They did make a couple of notes about transport and buildings in the how are we tracking part of this report. And on the transport front, they're saying, well, look, battery electric vehicle and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle growth remains rapid in the light vehicle space. Yep. But while the efficiency standard for vehicles is good, it doesn't have anything to say about heavy vehicles, and it doesn't keep tightening past 2029 on current policy. And both of those seem like obvious things to address, or at least to flag as areas for further government policy development in the sector plans that we're all waiting for and might be waiting a little longer for. And also they noted that heat pump imports had risen from about less than 50,000 per annum in 2020 to more than 200,000 per annum in 2024, which is strong growth, but also there's some growing pains with that growth, and a lot more growth would be needed to make a substantial dent in the built environment.
So I have a comment on your comment, because both of those things jumped out at me. So I referenced these leading indicators earlier. The only one they reference in this report related to the building sector is heat pump imports, which is presumably then an indicator of electrification. It's also an efficiency measure, but it's also sort of tied to electrification. And there isn't, interestingly, specific recommendations that go to electrification of the building stock, as they did in last year's report. There was like the whole section on buildings is on electrification. Like it's just a little bit less explicit in the upfront wording.
Yeah, they do reference their previous recommendations saying, you know, we need a plan for coordination, coordinated effort to get particularly households and commercial buildings off the gas network, right? So they reference that on the way through. They may feel like, well, we've recommended it once. It's probably,
You already said that.
It stands effectively. They sort of indicate that they still think that that's a good idea, but the government explicitly said that's not our job last time, and so they haven't recommended it again. But you're right. Like the topic of how we're dealing with that gas network transition isn't a big focus of this report. You referenced the sector plans, Tennant. I think that's going to be a fascinating part of the whole sector plan process, is how it deals with electricity system decarbonisation versus gas system decarbonisation, and what one would imagine is the handoff that is necessary to achieve decarbonisation and get to that net zero target. That's going to be a multi-decade process, needs to be carefully thought through, carefully coordinated, and it's kind of like the really big, hairy issue that nobody really kind of wants to talk about or deal with, but we have to deal with it, right? And so while it may not be prominent in this report, it is going to be absolutely crucial for us to get our arms around pretty soon.
Oh, I've got a suggestion on additional leading indicators that could be done. Like we should be looking at new gas connections and disconnections or abolishments. Also, like I mean that information could be available.
It's available.
So. And I liked your point, Tennant, on the heavy vehicles side of things, because there really isn't any policy kind of targeted towards that part of the sector. A lot of kind of early nascent kind of, you know, little bit of money here for like hydrogen trials and stuff, but actually nothing on the battery EV kind of potential for heavy vehicles, which we certainly, well, and I know, think you both did, but I copped a lot of incoming after we spoke about that Bloomberg New Energy Finance paper on heavy vehicles saying, yep, nobody's talking about hydrogen for heavy vehicles. It's batteries all the way from here on out.
Yeah. And the prospects for low carbon liquid fuels that are biofuels or synthetic fuels, like there is going to be some of that, and for some contexts it's much more likely than others. But yeah, there is a bit of a gap on either fully technology neutral or battery electric specific heavy vehicle stuff, and one way or another those gaps are going to have to be bridged. There were two more recs beyond efficiency and electricity. There was a safeguard rec, which is broadly they think the safeguard mechanism is like based on the extremely early limited data that they have and some modelling and extrapolation from that. They think
basically field data, Tennant.
Yeah, it's field, not fields. That's right. But they think it's like looking on track, but also they'd like a lot more information. And so they're recommending that safeguard facilities be required to provide rolling 5-year compliance strategies, indicating, among other things, how much they intend to rely on internal abatement versus the purchase of carbon credits, whether from other safeguard facilities or ACCUs from outside the system. That'd provide just a lot more confidence in what the balance of activity and external abatement looks like. And, they provide recommendations on flexibility with the use of climate-related financial disclosure reports where they cover this information rather than a whole new report. But like that is interesting, and certainly we are going to see a lot more data out of the safeguard as it proceeds. And the thing they touch on in the guts that we don't know a lot about yet is how much the TEBA, the Trade Exposed Baseline Adjusted system of slower baseline declines for some heavily impacted facilities, what that does to the overall scheme, and in turn what might happen to TEBA if our future friend, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, were to come about and replace TEBA for at least some activities. And then finally, CCA asks for some more work to do in their recommendation.
I loved this one because they're pointing out that at the moment the CCA isn't really required to or resourced up to do the kind of monitoring and evaluation of the adaptation side of the coin when it comes to Australia's climate change efforts. And so they're asking for that mandate to be given to track and review progress on the National Adaptation Plan, as well as the complementary climate risk assessment framework that would be reviewed every so often as well. And I think in proposing and asking for that mandate, they point out that versions of the CCA in the UK and New Zealand do have that mandate within their remit. So that's another bit of the policy furniture that we haven't yet seen as well. That one's been in the works for a little while now.
And I think we should note that when we took a look at the National Adaptation Plan issues paper, I seem to recall this very podcast speculating on a more formal role for the Climate Change Authority in the ongoing scrutiny of these plans. So it seems the CCA itself reckons that might be a good idea as well.
Are we trying to claim that was our doing?
I'm just noting evidence from our back catalogue. Frankie, you can draw whatever conclusions you like.
When the green power list speaks, the earth itself trembles.
God.
All right. So there is, of course, a response to the Climate Change Authority's annual progress report in the annual climate change statement tabled in Parliament by Energy and Climate Minister Chris Bowen. The responses range from agree to agree in principle to note and do not agree. I don't think we got any do not agrees. So noting was the strongest riposte we got from the government on any of these recommendations. There's a note on strengthen, broaden, lengthen and embed the capacity investment scheme. There's a note on this idea around combined synchronous condensers and the tenders that are to be won by AEMO to procure those services. Then we've got some agrees and agrees in principle. I'm not going to go through them one by one. The idea of an energy transition coordinator is noted. So I'm not sure that they're convinced that they need that particular individual in place. Everything else is agreed in principle. So agreed in principle I interpret as, oh yeah, we're sort of doing that already.
Well, some of those notes are things, like a lot of them are things that have resources attached to them or would be a big deal. And some of them are able to be picked up in the wholesale settings review of the NEM. And some of them aren't. So, I don't know, we'll keep an eye out for resources for at least investigating these things further. In my EFO, maybe. Maybe not.
The other thing that is going to be fascinating over the next year is to see the further evolution of this report following, one would presume, the next time we have Climate Christmas we'll have 6 sector plans and a 2035 target from government.
All I want for Christmas is a 2035 target, Frankie. I don't think I'm going to get it, though.
Sorry, there's going to be a sad, empty sack sitting under your Christmas tree, Luke.
I have a heartwarming story.
Does it involve an orphan girl and a 2035 target?
Very close. It's a badge that says, all I want for Christmas is Article 6.
God.
And,
there you go.
And that badge was given out by people from the International Emissions Trading Association at COP 27. And we didn't get Article 6.
No, I don't know if that is a hard one.
That Christmas or the one after that. But this Christmas, Article 6 is fully done for all those who put it on their Santa list, who had sugar plum fairies and Article 6 dancing behind their eyelids through the small hours of many a Christmas morning, and their dreams finally came true. And the same can be true of you, Luke, with the things that you would like from the next time of Christmas.
To hold the stocking till next year, mate.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Tennant, what have you got?
Well, I would like to mention an odd request that I had the other morning to go on the radio and chat with Tom Elliott at 3AW about gas prices. Not that odd. But what he wanted to talk about in particular was the impact of gas prices on house prices through inflating the cost of bricks and such like. And I had a look at this, and I want to talk just briefly about the conclusion that I came to, which is that there's some influence from the rising gas prices on the cost of building a home if it's a very brick-intensive home. It's not a very big part of house price rise stories. So for every $1 of gas price increase per gigajoule of gas, you might add somewhere between $70 and $230 to the cost of building a double brick house, depending on whether it's single story or double story. And we've had about $10 a gigajoule of gas price increase over the past 15 years. So like that, it's a couple of $1,000 of cost increase on a house at the high end. Of course, houses are now going for somewhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million for new ones of this size. And a lot of other stuff is involved there, land prices, interest rates, a lot of other things. So the short story there is it's not a big part of the story on house prices, and actually the cost of running a house is a much bigger piece of the gas story. The thing I wanted to sort of go on to, though, is why was I being asked this question? Because it's an odd thing to fixate on, but there's been like a panoply of odd how important is gas-related stories and questions out there at the moment, because there's a massive public relations push by the gas sector to say, don't forget about us. We're very important. You'd be very sad if we went away. And you need us now more than ever. And that's been like the front page of all the Murdoch papers every day for a week in an advertorial that's very innovative.
Yeah. Were you the collateral damage of this News Corp fossil fuel gas bonanza?
I feel like there's a lot of ideas being spun out to a lot of people as, it'd be interesting to ask people about this one. That's a story, isn't it? And maybe this was one of them. Maybe it's just part of the creative ferment of 3AW. But There's a very, very big maelstrom of public opinion forming going on, and people who give extremely boring answers like, some of this isn't so important, although some of it is, are really going against the grain right now.
Okay.
Bricks. I now have a brick spreadsheet.
Say, add it to the cake spreadsheet.
All right. Frankie, what have you got?
Oh, things are hotting up over here. But in this instance, I'm going to talk about a constructive aspect of that. On what day was it this week? Oh, my goodness. Maybe it was Thursday. I had the privilege to go along to see the launch of Greater Sydney's Heat Smart City Plan. So New South Wales Climate and Energy Minister Penny Sharp was there to launch it. This bit of work has really been forming up for, I'd say, like close to a decade. It's a partnership between WS Rock, so the Western Sydney grouping of councils, and Resilient Sydney, who've done really amazing work on mapping what broader metropolitan Sydney needs to be doing to make itself more resilient. And one of the very early things that team seized on early, when even doing their first strategy all those years ago, was identifying that particularly in Western Sydney, heat is a massive problem, and there are obviously a lot of socioeconomic factors that overlay over all of this, and there just needs to be a targeted focus in the western parts of the Sydney on making everything heat smart. And so we finally got a strategy that all sets that out. So it's great. It talks about decision making and governance. So what would you do in the event of a heat wave? So to be ready for that and set up and make sure you've got plans in place, the right delegation, the right parts of government talking to each other, but also what are you kind of making available to communities, in the event that something like that happens? It talks about places for people. So it has, things to say about all the stuff that we are prone to crap on about from time to time, about making sure that our homes are insulated or energy efficient, because that's going to protect people from extreme heat. Talks about how those things need to be managed, and not to be able to rely so much on heating and cooling, because when these kinds of days come up, and we didn't talk about it today, but there are risks of power failure into the future if we if we're not managing all of that right. So it just has a lot of really smart, sensible, needed things on the list that we need to get on with, from a buildings perspective, from a planning and public realm perspective, from an economics perspective and infrastructure, and also kind of governance and decision making. So I commend this brilliant plan, and I'll be really, interested to see how the work picks up, because there's a lot of doing that needs to be done on this one. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
All right. For my one more thing, I'm going to share some of the fun stuff this very podcast has planned for the summer break. This is our last standard episode for 2024, but for our super summer operas that support us with a subscription on Patreon and Apple Podcasts, I can reveal that on Christmas Day, you'll be getting the long-awaited Dungeons and Dragons live play episode dropping into your feed. Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. The bonus episode idea that started off as a joke is now a thing.
A prophecy. It started as a prophecy.
I can reveal here exclusively it features Dungeon Master Tennant Reed holding the space for a rollicking adventure in the famed city of Waterdeep, featuring Frankie's character, Neramore, a druid with angelic heritage, and a lovable pygmy goat sidekick. What was the goat's name again, Frankie?
I think I just called it Goat.
Famed creativity shining through yet again. And my character, the stuck-up dragon-born sorcerer Genku. Frankie, how would you describe the relationship between Naramore and Genku?
A bit like yours and my relationship after we've spent too much time around each other. Yeah.
Yes.
It was
tempestuous, I think we could say.
I think that was right. I think it is funny, like, because this is my first time ever playing Dungeons and Dragons, and like Luke and Tennant have a regular thing with their kiddos. So I had this sort of FOMO at a distance for a while, and it was like my chance to kind of lean in and have a go. And it was funny, just the way that I feel like our characters kind of just brought out parts of our personalities that sometimes interact with each other. It was a lot of fun. I'm actually kind of terrified to listen back to that. I don't think I will. Enjoy, people.
Well, I was listening back to it earlier today, and it is really rather delightful. So if you're intrigued, get on over to patreon.com/letmesumup. Subscribe to support the show, of course. We appreciate your support. And you'll have some role-playing from your favourite climate podcasters in your feed as a special thank you present on Christmas morning. No lumps of coal for Super Summer Upperers this year. But Frankie and Tennant, we love all our listeners, not just the Super Summer Upperers, so never fear. As is tradition, our annual holiday special will be in the main feed on New Year's Eve for all to enjoy. An episode in which we will do two things. First, we will hand out a papy. No, wait.
A wonky.
A wonky?
Can't believe you're still pushing that papy idea.
It's a wonky award for the best paper this year. And then we will talk about a movie that has some relationship with climate and energy. What climate and energy movie, you ask? Well, that's up to you, dear listener. We are running a poll, and the movie you choose is the one we will watch. So, Tennant, can you give us a rundown on the movies and perhaps an insight into the current leaderboard? Because this poll has been running for a few days as we record.
Yes. So the options are universally beloved, mysteriously never covered before in one of these Christmas episodes, Soylent Green.
A long-running, this is like the third year you've tried to make us watch this movie. I'm pleased to see it's not winning so far. Don't vote for it, people. Don't vote for it.
Look, I believe in the circular economy, Frankie. Currently getting support from just 10% of voters, but that still sees it miles ahead of not that beloved but definitely climate-themed disaster movie The Day After Tomorrow, sitting at an enormous 0%
I
support.
actually love that.
The 1970s nuclear power coming to get you disaster movie The China Syndrome, currently our leader with 35% of the vote. What was that one about again? James Cameron's spectacular Avatar, which does have significant themes of energy and resource use alongside other well-worn tropes at 15% support. Genuinely beloved animated masterpiece Princess Mononoke with strong environmental themes but limited energy ones at also 15%, and making a late break for freedom across the desert wasteland, Furiosa. And I thought excellent Mad Max movie, but a huge commercial disappointment, maybe about to be redeemed by its presence on the Let Me Sum Up Christmas list on 25% support. So who's actually going to prevail? Only, as Luke said, only you, dear listeners, can make that call.
Yes, so China Syndrome currently in the lead. So if you want to seal the deal for that movie or back in one of the others, click the link in the show notes and cast your vote. And we'll watch the movie that you tell us to.
Even if it's a late-breaking, massive support for the day after tomorrow, we will obey if we bust.
But we'll like you a little less.
All right. That is our show for today. We send in your comments, your questions, and your reports, although we won't be getting to them till next year now, at mailbag@letmesumup.net. This podcast, edited, of course, by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, how do we pay for that editing?
We pay for Mark's glorious services by asking those of you who can to just pitch in a little and help fund our activities on that front. So that's what the Patreon was set up to do, and we have been very lucky to have the support that we've had this year, having launched it, I think, at the start of the year. We're now able to work with an editor that covers most of our costs on that front, which is amazing. So just thank you so much, everyone, for doing that. So if you can continue to help us along on that front, you can find our fabulous Patreon at patreon.com/letmesumup. There are not only polls telling us what to do in our spare time in the lead up to Christmas. There's little bits of BOCO, including soon to be released D&D listen-alongs. There's also a few musings on US politics in and around the election. There's some funny, weird videos that we took at COP in between doing things, not explaining further. There might even be a bit of chat about T-shirts. You never know. You just have to go and look at patreon.com/letmesumup and chip us a few bucks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you indeed. And Tennant, we also have a website. What's there?
At www.letmesumup.net, you can find the free episodes, of which there are a lot. And unlike one of my favourite Onion headlines about the free version of a meditation app, these episodes don't feature panicked screaming every 15 minutes.
Sometimes in our minds, but not on the actual audio tracks. All right. We'll look forward to catching you for one or more of those special holiday episodes that are in your future. But for now, for Frankie Muscovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.